Hello everyone and welcome to another Scotsway podcast, and today I'm joined by writer and previous guest Karen Campbell to talk about the new novel This Bright Life, which is published with Canongate. Hello Karen.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm really well and I'm so looking forward to talking to you about this book. Before we get stuck into it, could you give us a synopsis of This Bright Life?
Okay, it's about a wee boy called Gerard. He's 12, just turned 12, lives in Denison, east end of Glasgow. Got a difficult home life and he's got two younger siblings. His mum is a drug user. He's been in and out of, social work, radar, etc, etc. Anyway, one day I don't know how much to give away of the plot, but basically there's an exciting incident, but I'll just say anyway. He steals an old lady's purse. He's desperate for money. Steals an old lady's purse, and in the process he knocks her over. So it becomes a much more, not that it's not serious to dip an old lady's handbag, but she ends up striking her head in the pavement, and she's seriously injured. He does a runner. So her name's Margaret, and then there's a third character, Claire, who's a newly divorced solicitor, just arriving in Denison, because a kind of thread throughout the book is it's on the cusp of up and coming Denison. And she witnesses it. So it's basically about what that one incident triggers, like a sort of pebble in a pond idea, what happens to Gerard in the course of that summer. And just about this idea, I think, of how our lives are all disconnected until that moment they're connected. Until something happens where disparate random folk suddenly share or are drawn into something where it can actually maybe be life-changing, and it's random as well, and what the repercussions of that are.
And you've mentioned the three central characters. It's very much character-driven. Although you say it's about Gerard, I suppose he is the kind of central figure in a way. The other two are absolutely key. Can you talk a little bit about them individually and how you came to kind of write about these people, Gerard to begin with?
Yeah, I'm glad you think the other two are key as well, because you never know.
I think they're absolutely key. In fact, I would say almost it's about the three of them running through it.
I think so as well, actually. But, I guess, for blurbs and things like that, it's kind of got to focus on what pulls your heartstrings more, which is the wee boy. But yeah, I think the whole premise of the book and the cover is this picture of a tenement. The working title was actually Tenement, which I still like, but it was felt that maybe wouldn't translate further afield.
Yes, yeah.
But this idea of we can all be in our own wee boxes, but we're only separated by the width of a wall, and that's true of community as well. So Gerard, I wanted to be the sort of focus of, what it's like for a young, vulnerable kid who potentially could go off the rails pretty much through no fault of their own, and what small interventions might either make him go worse or kind of bring him back to having some choices. And you need other characters for that to bounce off. And I didn't set out to think I'm going to have an old woman and a young woman. I just basically knew that this incident was going to happen, so the old lady became important because, I wanted to write about victims of crime as well. I wanted to write about how something, again, random, that isn't directed at you personally can feel so personal, like, a stranger has reached into your life and shaken it around. So Margaret, my elderly lady, is the character that does that. And then Claire, the younger woman, I think I've always been interested. My first novel, The Twilight Time, was about a woman in her 30s, and I was 30 when I was writing it. And it's about this idea of you get to a certain point in your grown-up life where you think, this isn't where I'm meant to be. This isn't what the plan was. She's successful, a solicitor, but she's just gone through a divorce. She's having to move to a smaller flat by herself in an area of town she doesn't really know. So she's trying to kind of keep it together. So these three different characters, they're all kind of in themselves. They're survivors, but they kind of keep their heads down. They don't really want to connect because it's safest not to.
Yeah.
And then that sets it up for when something happens where it's like the walls get ripped down and they are connected. It's interesting to see what happens in that mix. And also Gerard and the two women, they don't really meet at all in the book other than that incident. So I guess the two women, it evolved into actually a story about friendship, about intergenerational friendship, about people learning to trust each other again, in a way that I hadn't anticipated, but it actually felt quite satisfying.
Because they all kind of push other people away, as you say, maybe for reasons of self-preservation. Now, I'm wary, I don't want to give it too much away, but when Gerard is then kind of, you know, taken into a fostered as well.
Yeah, he ends up in foster care.
You know, he kind of is mixed feelings. To say mixed feelings is understating it. You know, almost every moment is thought through about, oh, this is a different world from me. But what have I left behind? And I still miss my mum, and he's got a younger brother who's basically the dad of the family, isn't it? He's far too young. He's brought up to kind of be, which is why he's in the situation he finds himself in. Mm-hmm. And the racial relationship between Margaret and Claire is an uneasy one as well, because Margaret doesn't really want. Suddenly, she's got all these people helping and popping by, and you know, I was thinking I couldn't imagine anything worse than that. But well-meaning often, you know, and Claire herself is wary of other people, perhaps because of what she's gone through. So it's interesting that instead of you've got people making connections who don't really want to connect.
Exactly, but I'm a bit like that too. I don't know if everyone is, but you know, every writer just sees the world through their own prism. However much you try and talk about universal issues, it's only how you experience the world that kind of filters into what you write. So yeah, I mean, I'm not one for chatting over the garden fence with neighbours. You know, be pleasant and polite, but people like turning up unannounced, I don't like that. So I suppose that there's maybe a bit of me in there too, but I think the more the book evolved, I always had this image of a tenement with different lights at the window, and this idea of you know that brilliant windows on the west, painting by Avril Payton.
Yeah.
That whole idea, all these little microcosms of worlds that you just don't know what's through the wall, and obviously these characters, it would be a bit cliched if they all live in the same house. They don't.
Yeah.
But they're in the same area, so community is to me, I guess, it's whether you like it or not. It's a bit like the roots of trees, or you know, the way mushrooms kind of connect under forests, and there's whole highways. But we are woven into the fabric of the community we live in.
Yep.
Almost whether we like it or not, and sometimes we might be reluctant joiners in. Sometimes we don't choose to join in, but maybe even just the acknowledgement and the observance of that community, the light shining from the window. I mean, we're in Strathbungo just now, and you've got that festival, haven't you, where people
Window Wonderland, it's coming out in next week. It's happening in March.
I think that's an incredible thing, and it doesn't mean you're going in and having a nosy around people's cupboards, but there's something in that, isn't there, to say we're sharing something with you, and that's maybe enough. You just, here's what we want to present to the world, looking out the window, this silhouette on the pane, and you can share it and enjoy it. So I don't think having a sense of commonality and community means that you have to be like a do-gooder or in somebody's face. But, you know, a lot of what happens to Gerard after this incident is, who are the folk that pick him up? The sort of unsung heroes, foster carers, social work, children's panel. You know, that they're all professions or voluntary things. In the case of the panel, that people have to just give that wee bit more of themselves, I suppose, to engage in, and you get good and bad people making up all of those you know, aspects of life too. But the sort of main driver for the Gerard character was, a good few years ago now, when we first moved down to Galloway, my husband became a youth justice mentor. So he was working with the social work department, and it was a job that you basically were mentoring boys that were at risk of going to jail. You know, 13, 14, a wee bit older than Gerard, definitely on social work radar, probably been in trouble with the police, difficult home lives, and it was a kind of, not so much a diversionary programme, but it was just a case of, if these boys had never had a role model that could offer them choices or chances, or even just take them somewhere they'd never been before, they don't know that there's another path they might choose to take. So Gerard definitely sort of evolved out of that. And you know, my husband was doing it because it gave us a wee bit of extra money, but he also got very involved and engaged in those kids. So yeah, maybe there's something in that too, that's professionally you have to keep your distance, but personally, or like a foster carer, like you're opening your home to somebody else's problems, really, and you're trying to protect your own family within that too, and you're probably, you know, having a rough time of it for very, very little reward, and nobody really sees that. And I guess I'm interested, I don't know if I could do that, but I'm interested in the motivations behind those sorts of connections too.
Those relationships are really interesting, particularly when Gerard has his foster family, because they think they're doing the right thing, but you can never tell how that's being perceived by Gerard in this case himself. You know, all these, suddenly seeing this different world can be quite overwhelming.
Yeah.
You know, the lovely big car in the driveway as the Craig, that's the name, yeah. And it has and you know, just going about living their lives the way that they see fit, and then introducing someone into that. You know, it just made me think now, as we were talking, Robin Jenkins' The Changeling. Do you know that novel?
No, I don't.
And that's about them taking it's a fantastic novel, but there's a teacher at school, and there's a boy who is, you know, kind of worst kids in the school, and the central figure says, let's take him on holiday with us, or he goes on holiday with them, and it just throws the whole family out of kilter, because the daughter's like, what's going on here, and there's the young, and the mum's, why have you done this, and he thinks he's doing the right thing, and yeah, it's exactly that thing. You don't know how the other person perceives it, and it goes for all of these characters, I think. Yeah,
and also I don't think, if you live in a comfortable middle class world, there's absolutely no shame or attached to that. You shouldn't, you know, the guy that's the foster dad, Craig, is a successful businessman, and you know, they've got a big house and they want to do good, and I'm not for a minute dissing that, but if that is your world and that's what you've known and that's what you're comfortable in, I wonder if you even recognise it's not someone else's world. Like Gerard is struck by things like there's real pictures on the wall.
Yeah.
He's struck by the fact that they've got so much stuff. How do rich people have so much stuff and they do so many things?
Yeah.
The kids, the older boys that are his foster siblings, I suppose, I mean, they do all sorts of activities, rugby and cricket and football, and he just finds it bewildering.
Yeah.
And I don't think that Craig and his family are even aware of that disparity. They'll think that's the norm. You know, they'll be aware that they've got more money and privilege, but I think in terms of how vast the gap is between people that have and people that don't, and people that literally don't have money for the meter, and that, then they don't cook, they don't eat that night. I'm not sure, you know, I'm comfortably middle class too. I think about it when I'm writing. I don't think about it when I'm going about my daily business necessarily, because the world you inhabit is your world. So I think I'm always interested too in when worlds overlap. And again, there's always going to be some sort of commonality. Like Gerard falls in love with one of the paintings because he's never seen something like that before, and it moves him in a way he can't explain. But he wouldn't have known that had he not seen that painting. So, you know, he's not dragooned into looking at it, but like the foster mum just tried to encourage him to read and love books and things, and he really doesn't want to do that. And there's obviously a reason that you find out later on why books are so frightening for him. So yeah, I think again, I'm maybe just exploring this. Yeah, when you do reach into someone else's life in a positive way, there's always something transactional about it, and also you don't always know that what you're doing is the right thing, but maybe the moral is, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head, should that stop us from getting involved?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really interesting questions about, because it's not just one person to one person, it's you know, different, you know, for instance, Gerard's brother goes to a different family, so there's that kind of split there, and then there's a situation with his mother, and then there's a situation with Craig's family, and you think, well, there's all these other people that are involved, but should that, as you say, should concerns about that stop us doing anything at all, because we never would. And the character of Margaret, who I think is fantastic. When you first read, I think it's in chapter 2 she first appears, and I thought, I really want to kind of hang out with Margaret. She sounds brilliant, and she's had such a kind of interesting life, and her looking back on life is a kind of central part of the novel as well. She goes back to the West End, again, someone out of probably her comfort zone. She's from the East End, but she's sent to school privately. Is it privately?
Yes.
Yeah, in the West End, where she doesn't really fit in there because of where she's from. So again, you've got this almost cuckoo, like, how did you appear in with us?
That's true. Yeah, and Margaret, maybe it's because I'm getting older. I'm not as old as Margaret, but I think older women, I find that really interesting to write about. I've always thought that, you look at an elderly person and somebody in the shop in front of you get impatient, don't you? You're like, oh, God, count out your change, missus, why are you taking so long for 2 tins of cat food and a pint of milk, that kind of thing. And these people have got a rich life, a rich hinterland. And so with Margaret, you see this wee old lady, and yet she's got a very rich inner life. She's very well read. Education was instilled into her as a kid. But she's also had her moments of rebellion. The man she chose to marry distanced her from her parents. But she's maybe a bit lonely, but she's reasonably happy and self-contained. She has her wee world. She's seen what she wants to the world. She's got her wee cocoon. And then one day going for the messages, that's all blown out of the water. And when she comes back from hospital, she's terrified even to sleep in her bed, because she's on the ground floor flat and she's thinking someone could reach in my window. And so I wanted her to be sort of multifaceted, but at the start I wanted her to be reasonably content, at least on the surface, so that this incident kind of shakes everything up, and she's actually remembering the past, but she's almost reliving it at times, and she feels that her head's been shaken up and fragments are coming out that she thought she'd buried. Yeah,
absolutely. And then as the novel goes on and you hear about her relationship with her son, and won't say any more about that, but you realise the kind of there's regret and all sorts of things there as well. I think at the beginning I thought, I can see myself growing old like Margaret. Absolutely. And it's set over a summer, kind of April to August. Yes. Is that significant? Is that
really, with the sort of time frames? Obviously, when social work get involved, there's a children's panel, there's a hearing. There are sort of set times, like somebody's under supervision, it may be for a 3-month period or whatever. So there was a degree of that I had to have things happening in the sort of time frame that they would, like, somebody kids been taken to an emergency place of safety, that would happen instantly, but then there'd be a review, and then they would make sort of longer term decisions. But in the case of Gerard, there's issues around child protection because his mum can't look after them, but also he has committed assault and robbery, really, is what it is. But at his sort of age, the children's panel and the hearing system are very keen not to criminalise a child, so that there's this kind of, it's not probation, but you're under supervision, and that can be for protection issues, but also in terms of, will you engage with other services like anger management and various other things. So that kind of time frame allowed me to introduce those sorts of things. I've, to be honest, found the whole system quite confusing, and I'm an ex-police officer, but I didn't deal with things after the event. I've got a good friend who's a social worker, and another one who, in fact, 2 friends that are social workers, and another person who volunteered for the children's panel. So I kind of checked with them what the tipping points would be, and how the format of different meetings would be. And even then I was thinking, this is like too much. Then I thought, well, everything's going to be processed through Gerard's eyes. So it was a bit of a get out for me too. I knew the framework, I knew roughly who would be doing what at what time. But as far as Gerard's concerned, it's another meeting with folk with clicky pens, and they're telling him what to do or what to say, or they're asking him something, but they don't really want to hear what he's saying. So it doesn't really matter if it's a social worker or the reporter to the children's panel or whatever. He's just seen it as an adult that's not maybe out to get him. I mean, he's a really bright boy, Gerard, but I guess it's like any person. If you are left to sort of survive on your own, you learn to thrive on your own too, and you really resent interventions.
And you rely on your kind of street smarts or whatever it might be.
And all he wants at any point, even when the police are like questioning him about the assault, is, I just need someone to help a wee bit when my mum's not good. That's all we need. But you're feared to ask for that, because then the whole system sort of takes over and you lose any autonomy, and we kids don't have a lot of autonomy anymore. Yeah,
and that seems to be at the heart of his, when he is fostered, that he doesn't have that, you know, he's desperate to make sure his brother is okay, and even though he finds out his brother is okay still, you know, that disconnect really, it's really harmful, I think, to him, you know, for himself.
But, you know, a reason that I did that, I mean, dramatically, I suppose it's good, but literally as well, different kids of different age groups will have different needs. So some foster carers will only deal with, you know, babies maybe or whatever. So, and also, I think there's a sense that Gerard's a bit of a bad influence on his wee brother, who's sort of emulating, you know, the tough guy. So there's a logic behind that, but it doesn't make it any less cruel and awful for a wee boy who's seen his role as the protector of his siblings to then not have them.
The reason I thought about the summer was because I thought for the three central characters, they'll go at different speeds. When you're 12 years old, summer just seems to stretch on forever. And then I think when you're Margaret's age, and Claire's age, but, you know, particularly Margaret, then, you know, it can go, time just can go like that. And I thought, well, it made me think about how they would be perceiving events, you know, over that time.
That's a really good way of looking at it. I hadn't thought of that, but you're absolutely right. Yeah. I think for Margaret, it's like time it becomes interminable, and our world is just empty and like pointless almost. And so you know, the days just stretch, and she doesn't do anything to punctuate them anymore. She just wants to curry in, and
it's the day after the day after, and it becomes one leads into another.
Yeah, definitely.
And we've mentioned it's set in Glasgow, particularly Denniston, and where we are today, kind of Strathbungo, Shawlands and Queen's Park. And I was thinking, they're areas that don't get written about very much, even in Glasgow novels. So why did you want to set them there?
Well,
events there?
The East End, because it's a part of the city I don't know that well. And my daughter moved there about 6 years ago.
Right.
So I'm getting to know it a lot better. And, you know, it's where Glasgow began, isn't it? You know, the sort of ancient medieval city grew up around about the high street and the cathedral. So I find history fascinating anyway. I had an idea at one point to have the Mall and Diner burn as something really important, like running under. There's a sort of reference to it in the novel, but it ends up not being that important. But something I might revisit in the future. So that was it was on my doorstep. I didn't know it that well, and I had an opportunity to learn more about it. So, and also it's the sort of place where it is on the cusp of up and coming. You know, there's areas that are pretty rough and within one street, you know, there'll be a Bookies, the sort of old off sales with the metal grill, and some lovely new coffee bar that's doing falafels and things like that. So it's got that nice mix of, again, different communities.
By jail. Absolutely.
Strathbungo, to be honest, was a happy accident. It was a chap called Craig who basically bid to be a character in one of my books.
Oh, right, okay.
It was an auction for, you know, the Hansel Trust down towards Troon.
Yes, I do know that, yeah.
It's got workshops and things for people with special needs, and they make furniture, and I think it's a garden centre too. So it was a fundraising thing, and I had said somebody could bid for a character in one of my novels, and this guy Craig bid, so he is from Strathbungo. So, you know, we met up. Actually, we didn't, because it was during COVID, so we had a long chat over the phone, and I basically found out a lot about his life, so I tried to imbue a fair bit of that into the novel. But again, I don't know if there's ever accidents in fiction, because it's like your brain, everything just kind of knits together, and it gave me this really nice, I don't know if I'd thought about a guy that was more affluent with kids of his own fostering, and so it gave that sense of Gerard's really a fish out of water. He's not just in a different family, he's in a different world. And the whole art thing as well, and the really maybe not spooky thing is, but it turned out this chap Craig, his mum was an art teacher, and he was talking about her, and I was like, what school did she teach in? Williamwood. I went there. She was my art teacher.
Brilliant.
So it gave that bit about the painting as well. So, you know, it just all kind of went into the mix. And Strathbungo isn't that far away from the East End either. So it's like, you know, it's across the river.
Mm-hmm. Although it seems, having lived
yes.
on High Street for years, used to think it was miles away, and now I live here. It's it's walking distance.
Geographically, but
it's what a river running
Gerard,
through your city does, I think.
It's like he's in a different world. But he's, at one point in the novel, he's up at the flagpole in Queen's Park looking down, and he can see the whole city. And I remember that view as a child, and kind of takes your breath away. Just, you know, another perspective on your city and how small everything is, and what seems huge when you're up close is just like nothing, is it? It's just one of thousands of other buildings and lives, and so Strathbungo was a happy accident, but I think it worked out well.
It worked out very well because it allowed you to use Queen's Park as a place for, as you say, go up the flagpole, but also meetings between different families and meetings, you know, with other characters as well. And it is, you know, Glasgow's parks are like that. I think, you know, you can bump into nearly anyone.
Yep, definitely.
So this is your 9th novel, is that right?
Yep.
And I was thinking about the themes do you recognise that there are themes that kind of run through them?
I don't consciously, but I'm sure if I thought deeply enough about it, yes, I think facades is a strong theme. I think even going back to the police books, this idea of what you see on the surface, it's never the whole person, it's never the whole situation, it's never the whole place. We're all a myriad of different things at different times with different people, and I'm interested always in sort of scraping that facade and just having a wee peek behind, and I suppose sort of social issues. Just I think the more I write, the more I'm interested in quiet voices, and I don't want to be like crusading about things. I'm going to pick this subject this time, but just genuinely, I think people are fascinating, and often it's the people that don't shout the loudest that are like somebody like Margaret, that when you dig that wee bit deeper, my goodness, they've got stories to tell. And it's just interesting as a writer to try and tell them.
So one of the things, and this is a bit of a cliche, but it's my city, I'm going to make it anyway. The thing I love about Glasgow is sitting beside someone who's, I had it in the co-op the other day, he's just willing to have a chat. Never met him before, we'll never see them again probably, but was, I'm doing this and I'm doing that, my daughter's doing that. And you do get those little stories. I do love that. I was thinking about, you seem to write about those, I guess you've said this, who are rarely represented or written about otherwise. You know, I'm going back to This Is Where I Am. We should say to people who maybe don't know, you did 3 crime or police procedurals, would you say?
Well, no, I wouldn't.
You wouldn't? Okay.
It's four books about the police,
right.
But I used to be a police officer, so I from the very outset, I was like, I'm not writing about crime, I'm writing about what it feels like to wear a uniform.
Right, okay.
And, you know, how that distances you from society and the sort of things you might engage with. You know, in 6 years service, I was at one murder, and all I did was stand outside the door to stop reporters getting in. I never saw the body yet, so it was trying to give a reflection of what that idea of you feel vulnerable inside, but you've got this symbol of power on the outside. So anyway, I wrote 4 of them, but they did get branded as crime novels.
I remember actually the first time we spoke, you were saying the way that these are sold, I'm not, because they were kind of made to look like every other crime novel.
Yeah, and I'm not dissing crime novels, but you know, I would get reviews saying there's pages where nothing happened. People just talk to each other, and it's like, but that's intentional. So I wrote them, and then the next book I wrote was This Is Where I Am, which was about a Somali refugee living in Glasgow. Yeah,
and I was thinking, for me, that was that might have been the first novel of yours I read, I think. And there's not just the central character, but characters again. It's characters who maybe you wouldn't think their worlds would collide, but they do, and that enriches them both. But people that maybe you wouldn't find in the pages of a book, and maybe that goes back to what you're saying about the police books, is that people were expecting certain things, but actually again, people that you maybe wouldn't expect in a crime novel.
Yeah, I think so, and I think the job of not the job of a writer, it sounds very highfalutin, but what I like about writing is you have this opportunity to turn the world upside down, look at it from another angle, shape perspectives, just spend a minute in the sort of zone of another life in a way that in real life we wouldn't, cause we pass by because we're busy with our own lives. And the reading is, for me, is the same thing. It's about escaping into other worlds that might feel disparate, but actually there's that human connection, that we're all humans and we all feel and want and lose and love and hate, and all of those things are common. So
people often talk about, having a main character energy. It's something I've heard recently, or you want to be the kind of star of your own film or whatever it might be, but your characters often, for really good reasons, don't want to be seen, or there's reasons that they're, from the Somalian refugee, and This Is Where I Am, through, even in Paper Cup, you've got someone who, so that was your last novel before this one, and central character is homeless, and is ignored often at times. You've got scenes in the beginning where people are just walking past and ignoring. So it's maybe not their choice, but again, rarely written about, I think, in fiction, and have no great desire to be the star of their own films in that way. They're kind of, for good reasons, sometimes actually want to be quiet.
But maybe that's then interesting to kind of...
it is. It very much is. Absolutely, I think it is.
Why are you the way you are, and what put you there, and do you want to be there, or do you want to go somewhere else? And again, like in our real lives, we don't tend to examine our own lives that deeply, but I think fiction is a vehicle that you can. A bit like Gerard on the hill looking down over Glasgow, you can see something from another perspective and get a different picture of it, that you might maybe change a view about something, or just... I love the sort of books where you come out feeling different from when you went in, and it doesn't necessarily matter if it's a good or a bad feeling, but it shoot you up in some, even a tiny way, just like a breath moving through you. So maybe that's what I try and do in my work as well. Just, okay, there's not going to be lots of high octane car chases in this, but it will be quite immersive, quite character driven, and maybe slow, but it hopefully will lead to a different exit from the park than the one you took in. Going back to my Queen's Park analogy.
Absolutely. And I was thinking about perspective, because Gerard's perspective on his home in Denniston changes, I think, and he does return. So he kind of thinks about things slightly differently. And I was wondering, you lived in Glasgow, but you now live down in Galloway. Do you think differently about the city, having moved away from it?
That's a good question. Certainly miss it more than I thought I would. And maybe actually, I've been away for 14 years now, so there's bits of it preserved in aspect that don't actually exist anymore. The pace of change, when you actually go into town, you're like, oh, okay, that place I was going to go for my lunch isn't there anymore. But I think I feel more protective of it. That sounds silly, doesn't it?
No, I don't know if it does.
Like, when you hear about like another building going up in flames or something, or just the mess of the city, all that kind of thing, it's because I can remember, like, in the 80s, when Glasgow was on the up, the Garden Festival and City of Architecture and Design, and I was a press officer in the City Chambers for a number of years, so I've got a lot of pride and love for the city, and maybe when you live in it, all those changes don't feel so dramatic, because they just kind of, they're organic, they're just happening. But when you're away and you come back, I get quite annoyed. I'm like, stay to Sauchiehall Streets. So yeah, I'm more protective of it.
I think that's right. I think when you're living in it, and you're getting up and every day, you don't notice these changes, and then it can be quite dramatic if you've been away for a while and then come back and go, oh right, okay, that's either been built, or more likely that's either been taken down.
Exactly.
And in terms of approaching a novel brand new, does it different every time? For instance, in this one, did you have the characters and then build their stories, or how did it work?
Yeah, it is different every time, but I think the process is broadly similar in that the idea I'll have will be pretty small. It'll just be an itch I need to scratch, something, vulnerability, say, in this book, or this idea of a kid making choices. That was the sort of thing I wanted to write about, based on what my husband had been doing with the youth justice team. But thereafter, I think I just begin writing. I don't plan it out very much. So the first character I wrote, I think it might actually be Margaret, which is chapter 2. I think she was the first voice I wrote, because I could picture the flat she was in from my daughter's window. I could see the flat I thought she was going to be in, so I think I just started writing that one day. And then I started to write, and I don't know why I picked a wee boy rather than a wee girl, Gerard. I don't know, but I did. His voice just came out as a wee boy. And then Claire, she came sort of later on, so it's like building something round a central idea, and then it's like, okay, actually I need this bit of support here, I need this bit of ballast there, and then you kind of try and weave them together. And actually, again, I don't want to give too much of the story away, but I had thought at the start that Gerard and Margaret, the old women, that they would definitely be involved with each other beyond the incident. And I kept trying to knock them into shape, and I was like, no, God, he's gone that way and she's gone that way, and I just thought, okay, just let that happen. So that wasn't a planned thing, and I would say what does happen ultimately, but it wasn't what I thought would happen. I thought, I've got these building blocks in place, I think this is where it's going to go, and then it didn't go that way. And I think it's possibly better for that. Yeah,
that's interesting. He almost literally turns down another street so that they're going to miss each other. And it just strikes me again as we're talking, so many things are coming back to me from the book. But actually, Gerard's also looking for friendship as well, which he finds, which is a lovely kind of relationship.
With Ali, the older boy who's in foster care.
Yeah.
Who's also, he was a bit of a bad lad
too.
Yeah.
But, yes, again, really multifaceted. And it's lovely that, we've spoken a lot, not just about the three central characters, but a lot of secondary characters who are absolutely three-dimensional and have so many different aspects. I'm now thinking about Gerard's granny in that sense, and we think one thing, Ali's a good example, and actually we're proven to be wrong, if wrong's the right word, or at least there's other things going on.
Yeah, no, definitely. And again, they're not planned particularly when I start, but it just kind of evolves as you write. And
so you get surprised when someone does something and you go, all right, that's out of character.
And Ali's quite a humorous, funny guy. And he's into gardening as well. I didn't plan that. I just had to have somebody sit beside Gerard in the bus the first day he goes to the gardening gorillas. It's like a diversionary sort of do like community farm stuff over the summer. And he just, I think sometimes they're the best characters when their voices just, like, you can just hear them, and you just go, okay, off you go, let's see what you're going to do. And sometimes you have to rein it back and say, no, that's not where I want to take this story. But Ali was a really warm, kind, I can picture him, big sort of bulky boy. But he's also like a car thief and things like that. But I'm not saying it doesn't make you a bad person, but he's got a lot of kindness in his heart too, and he sees in Gerard somebody who could have been him a few years ago. And, it still doesn't stop him like giving him fags and cider and things like that, but it's done with the right reasons, and maybe that is what Gerard needs at that moment. He needs a kind of big brother figure.
Big brother figure, right? That's exactly what I felt.
Yeah.
So going back to how you write it, you're saying there's different structures. You've got three kind of central narrative voices. Is it the case of it all fits together pretty easily, or do you think, we need a bit more Claire there, or we have not had Margaret for a while, or how does it?
I think for me, Gerard was definitely the driving sort of arrow of the narrative. So it was about what happened to him in that summer was what I really, that was, if there's a dramatic impetus, that was the thing. So the other two kind of maybe weave round that more. And with them, I don't think I actually thought, we've not heard from her for a wee while. it just felt like at the right time, you know, when Margaret gets back from hospital, she feels so vulnerable. She is, you know, broken in spirit as well as body kind of thing. So you kind of think, well, what help would she need in place? What would happen to her there? How might she feel about that? So those things just began, and then, again, without giving too much of the plot away, Claire comes into her life. And so their friendship, I didn't want that to take away from Gerard, so it kind of builds in smaller chunks, interspersed throughout the book. And there's also elements of Margaret's story that you're getting in kind of memory flashbacks as well. So I think with that, well, there's actually like points where you're kind of back in time. I probably wrote most of that as like a short story almost of it happening, and then worked out where I could chunk that up into the story. Otherwise it would have been one too many threads. I would be all over the place. So I wrote that as a single narrative and then sewed it in.
That's really interesting. Because what you get for all the central characters and some of the secondary ones is the reasons that they are how they are, a real kind of backstory, almost like if you were, I would imagine, you know, an actor creating a character, you would think, well, what's the reasons that these people are they are, and that comes through for all the three central characters. Even though Gerard's had quite a short life, you know why, for instance, the incident that propels the whole novel happens.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose you don't want to over-explain things to the point that people aren't engaged either.
No,
so you've always got to strike that balance.
No, I think you want to know more about all of them.
All right, well,
you know,
that's
you really do. You know, and I think as well, your opinion changes about all of them, which is a really important thing. I think.
Yeah, I think, you know, we can all be guilty of making snap judgments about people or situations.
If you were to have a picture of Gerard, Margaret and Claire, and you think, right, who are these people? You would come to completely different kind of...
You absolutely would. But I bet that's true of every single person you see on the bus or walking down the street. So, there maybe only is like 6 or 7 plots in the world that, you know, they say. But there's infinite stories in terms of how infinite human beings are and their capacity to love and hate and harm and lift up. And, you know, I've had some like early reviews of this on NetGalley, and there's, I mean, there are pretty good reviews, all of them, but a lot of them are, you know, it's very sad and very depressing. I thought it was quite an uplifting story and quite positive and life affirming.
Absolutely. I think it really is life affirming. I think all of your novels are life affirming in that sense. And partly that's because you managed to get readers to empathise. And perhaps at the beginning they didn't think they were going to empathise with these characters, but actually as you explain situations and you get to know them, that's I think what it is. You allow people to get to know these characters instead of just going, right, write that person off, that person's like that, or whatever. There's a quote at the beginning of the book which fascinated me. It's from Alan Reich, who's the professor of Scott Lit at Glasgow Uni, on his hero Hugh McDermott. And can I read it? Is that okay?
Yes.
So I've got it here. It's just a 2-line quote. What do you want, you who are alive here today? What do you want for the future? Now, was it the quote itself that really stood out to you, or was there something more about McDermott or even Alan?
It was that quote. It was an article Alan McDermott had written, Alan Reich, mixing my people. He had written, I think in the National, like a good few years ago, about McDermott, but that quote just stood out. It was like one of those things you sort of, you know, people have inspirational like calligraphy on their kitchen wall. It was kind of like, whoa, I like that. So I just had it at the back of my head, and partly I was looking to rename the book because, as I said, Tenement was a working title, and there's a bit quite near the end of the book where Claire is looking, I think in Duke Street, and she's talking about all the lights and all the windows like beating their hopeful pulse into Glasgow, you know, and like since there were candles there or gas lamps or whatever, and it was just about the hopefulness of that, I suppose. So that quote, I don't know, it just, some of these things spring into your mind when you're thinking about a certain train of thought anyway, and that quote just kind of jumped back, and I looked it up and I was like, now, was that McDermott or not? And I actually contacted Alan Reich and said, where did that come from? And he said, oh no, I thought that's what he might ask, but I just made that up. It's like, well, could I use it anyway, please? And he said, yeah, absolutely. So it just seemed to me to bring together a lot of the threads in the book towards the end of it, when I was thinking about different names and thinking, you only get one life. And no matter how dark the world is, even if you can make it shine a tiny bit, is that enough of a connection that someone else sees that shine out of a window and they know they're not alone? So that McDermott related quote seemed to sum that feeling up for me. It's about hope and about analysing and introspection and taking a moment to examine the life that you live and wonder if it could be different or other.
I think that one of the reasons I thought maybe there was something else going on with McDermott is at one point you used the clam jamfrey. And that
word.
Yeah, I know. But the only other place I've seen it is the Bonnie Brook at Bairn, McDermott's poem. So that's, you didn't get that from there. That's amazing.
I just think it's like stramash. There's just some
words. It's a fabulous word.
I love the weight of it in my mouth. I love the whole...
The hail clam jamfrey.
There's a few times that Margaret sort of saying, like, she said, I'm fair finnert.
Yeah.
And Claire's like, what does that mean?
Yeah. There's some fantastic Scots in the book. Yeah.
I like... And again, with Margaret being older, because I remember my grandpa, talking about it's Ben the press in the lobby.
Yep.
It's in the whole cupboard.
Yep.
In his tenement. And I just love that richness that I don't want that to get lost either.
No.
Like the buildings of Glasgow, I want the language to stay too. So I relished the chance to use those words, but I didn't make that connection.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, it shows you can read something.
Yeah, but I love that too, that you can take something different out of a book than what the writer intended. That to me means it's working, because it's giving you a space to insert your own experience.
I think that's a really interesting thing is you don't direct people how to think. You leave it up to the readers to kind of decide for themselves all the way through. So some people might see it as a sad novel.
Absolutely.
I struggle to see that. I can kind of understand it a little bit, depends on your experience. You bring your experience to it as well.
Yes, yeah.
And I was going to ask you about favourite Glasgow novels, but I don't think we've ever talked about influences on your writing. So are there Scottish novels or writers that you admire particularly?
Oh, I mean, there's lots. I did the Creative Writing Masters at Glasgow University, and I was in my 30s when I did that, and I'd done English at Glasgow Uni when I was 17, and I was not aware of the wealth of good, fine Scottish literature that we have. And Alistair Gray was one of the professors at the time. James Kelman was also. Tom
So
Leonard.
You were part of that. That's a legendary time.
That legendary time where it was like, we'll maybe have a lecture if we feel like it. I don't know. Turn up, see what happens.
We might mark some papers.
Everyone came out of an Alistair Gray lecture saying, what did he say? I don't know, but my God, it was amazing, wasn't it? But I don't understand what I meant to do. But I read Lanark before that, to my shame, because I hadn't read it before. And then, like, Janice Galloway lectured on it, Liz Lockhead. So you're being introduced to all of these writers that I was like, why do I not? I'm 30, I love literature, and I had a vague inkling of some of them. Probably my earliest, like, trigger was Sunset Song when I was 17 for my hire. Again, a book I wouldn't have read if it wasn't on the syllabus, and I adored it. I just fell in love with it, and because Chris Guthrie was the same age as me, there's obviously that connection about a woman, but like Claire in my novel, that's like, this isn't what I planned, and I don't know what path to take, and but also just for the language, for the cadences, for the way that Lewis Grassic Gibbon could make a folk voice 1 minute, the whole community is speaking. You can hear the noise of the corn blowing in the wind the next by the lilt of his sentences. This, English Chris and Scots Chris and that whole, the sort of conflict about where your culture is, and it just blew me away. So I think that is maybe the beginning of when I thought, not only do I love books and literature, but that's voices like the way I speak. Maybe I could write that way too. I love people like Ali Smith, A.L. Kennedy, Kirsten Innes, Anne Donovan. Just it's so rich and varied. And again, people maybe from out with Scotland might think, oh, Scottish fiction's a certain type of dark, miserableness, you know, and that it's
No,
like,
it's everything.
well, it's a whole nation, it's a whole culture, it's everything. So there isn't one that I could choose, but I think James Kelman 100%, you know, and Kieran Smith Boyd definitely was playing in my mind when I was writing this book.
I hadn't thought that, but now you bring it up, I can absolutely see that.
Yeah.
There's a great novel about a young,
incredible.
and the language as well. But Sunset Song, of course, a great community novel. There they are at heart of a community which changes over time.
And isn't always kind to each other.
No,
It can be
and you
horrible
get
to
people
each
who
other.
don't want to be involved in it, as you said right at the beginning.
But they still are.
But they're still part
By
of it.
virtue of geography or humanity, they still are.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about your last novel, Paper Cup, because that seemed to me to be one of those novels that everyone I spoke to who had read it really wanted to talk about it. It seemed to mean a lot to a lot of people. Was that your experience of it, and were you surprised by the reaction to it?
Yes, and yes. It really was. I've had so much sort of love for that book and positivity about it. You know, and from where I live to in Galloway, people are like, thank you for writing about this area, because a lot of it is set down in southwest Scotland. And it was a bit of a love letter to Galloway as well. But yeah, it's been, the response to that book, it's been kind of slow and steady. It doesn't like hit the bestseller list, but it's consistently doing well, and it's just, I still get messages. I got a message from someone in Canada the other day that read it. You know, so it's going to places that I wouldn't have thought wee homeless Kelly in Galloway would have touched. But yeah, it seems to be. And I think she was one of my favourite characters to write, because she just poured out. She was just like absolutely herself from the beginning. I didn't really have to work with her too much. She was funny and feisty and complex and mercurial, and yeah, all that potential that wasn't realised in her life.
I think that's a great example of a character who, at the beginning, some people might think, well, I've got nothing in common, therefore I will not engage, and by the end you empathise absolutely with
even though
her.
she's stealing someone else's knickers from a hotel room.
Yeah, exactly, all of it. And also such a strong sense of place. I mean, this has got such a strong sense of Glasgow, but Galloway, again, for many years, it's got a history of literature going back, but for a long time people really hadn't written about it. So that and it gives it that sort of real strong sense of place too. Yeah,
and I think that the thing, again, a sort of happy accident. You know, I was setting Paper Cup in Galloway because that's where I was living, and it was a bit like Dennis, and I kind of wanted to know more about it, so it's a good excuse to swan off and go for walks and things and read history books. But absolutely, coming from the Central Belt to Galloway, I can say hand on heart that Galloway is a forgotten corner of Scotland in a way that really irks me, in terms of, you know, infrastructure, funding, jobs, all of those sorts of things, and just folk don't go there. It's not on the way to anywhere really, unless you're getting the ferry to Ireland. But with Kelly, my homeless woman, being a kind of forgotten soul too, it actually fitted really nicely together, and she's from there originally, so it was, I think it made her feel more valued being back in the place that she thought she didn't want to go back to and had run away from, but actually that's what gave her roots and sustenance, and it just the landscape itself changed her. So again, it's a beautiful place to write about. That idea of what you think you don't want actually is a really important part of you as well. That's true. And so what's next for you? Is it too early to say? Number 10? I don't know. Or is it just all about This Bright Life at the moment? Well, I've written about 20,000 words of something. Still not sure at the moment. I think it will be contemporary, but at the moment it's mostly historical. Okay. But I don't want. I've written one historical novel, the Italian World War II one, and that took me 4 years. I don't want to go back to research hell. But I think it's going to be about St Enoch. You know, St Mungo's mother, St Thenu, as her real name is. But with a modern context. Okay. How I'm going to get there, I don't know. I'm just doing the research at the moment. So, did you know the Mollen Diner, not the Mollen, St Enoch's Burn, runs underneath West Nile Street? I don't think I did know that, but is there a mention of that in? Because in now was it Rob Roy? It is Rob Roy, isn't it? Where there's bits set in the old parts of Glasgow, like the High Street and everything.
And I think it mentions a burn down by St.
There were
Enoch's.
stepping stones that you had to go over.
Yeah.
So I'm getting lost in all of that just now. How I'm going to make it into a novel, I don't know. But
you're enjoying researching it.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Karen, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I think This Bright Life is a brilliant novel. I enjoyed it so much, and enjoyed so much talking to you about it, because things were coming back to me as we were speaking. So yeah, thanks a lot.
That's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.